it rightly deserves. We're going to kind of open it up and have more of a discussion than just a kind of a presentation just on these pieces. Because I think particularly as it relates to the apartheid framework, how that's been used by different forces within the Palestinian movement and also internationally. Many of us have always had some, including myself, have had some problems with that framework and analogy and how it's related in particular to the BDS strategy and some of the shortcomings I think many of us have always held that strategy kind of holds out on its own as it relates to the liberation of Palestine. So if we could just go around and just briefly do introductions so everyone has a sense of who's in the room. Just your name, where you're from, organization if you care to share. We can go with that, and we always start to the left.
Well, my name is Conrado. I'm Brazilian. I'm from the countryside. And I'm just a student, a law student.
My name is Rabab. I am from Palestine, via San Francisco. And I'm a professor at San Francisco State University in Race and Resistance Studies and Arab and Muslim Studies. And I'm part of the U.S. delegation.
Hi, my name is Lindy. I am from South Africa, working for the Foundation for Human Rights.
Shrabi from the Foundation for Human Rights in SA.
Where in South Africa?
Johannesburg.
Jaime Veve from New York, a union organizer, a long-time political activist in a number of areas, including Palestine.
I'm a member of the U.S. delegation.
And member of the U.S.-Canada delegation, of which is sponsoring this panel and a number of other panels.
Darryl Jordan, I'm a member of the U.S.-Canada delegation, currently unemployed. I think that's important. That puts me in line with a whole lot of my brothers and sisters around the world. I like to consider myself a long-time activist and organizer.
It's Mohammed Desai from Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions South Africa, and I come from the city of Johannesburg.
Hello everyone, peace. My name is William Copeland. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, environmental justice and youth organizer from Detroit, part of the delegation from the United States and Canada.
Right, I'm Dukes Nhlapo from the South African Student Congress, and I'm from Johannesburg.
I'm Rose Brewer, activist and professor from the U.S., and I'm with the joint U.S.-Canada delegation.
I'm Loubna Qutami. I am a part of PYM, but I also work
with PYM.
Palestinian Youth Movement, and I also work for the Arab Resource and Organizing Center in San Francisco, California. And I'm also on the U.S.-Canada delegation.
My name's Bettina. I work for a software development company called ThoughtWorks. We do a lot of social impact projects, and I currently work in Brazil and possibly moving to Johannesburg this next year.
I'm Thandile Kona from South Africa. It's a small town called Port Elizabeth. Well, it's called Nelson Mandela Bay now. I'm from the Muslim Youth Movement of South Africa.
My name is Susanna Daly. I'm an activist, Palestine Solidarity activist from New York with Al-Auda, the Palestine Right to Return Coalition, and also a trade unionist, and I'm with the U.S.-Canada delegation as well.
My name is Loubna Qutami. I am Palestinian. I live in San Francisco, and I am with the Palestinian Youth Movement internationally and part of the U.S.-Canada delegation.
Okay, so in really opening this piece up so that we have a conversation. Again, for the folks who came in a bit late, we really just want to kind of open this up and have some frank exchanges and some discussion and debate. Because I think the quite frankly, the context in which we developed this workshop and some of the issues that we wanted to address with this workshop, really kind of challenging some of the narrative as it relates to Palestine and the two-state solution. That game has changed a little bit, not a whole lot, but a little bit. And I think we need to discuss that and what it means, how do we understand it. Many of us who put this piece together, this is a form of kind of introduction, we're clearly advocates for more of a settler colonial narrative to understand and historize and then develop strategies on how to understand the Palestinian liberation movement, which offers somewhat an implicit and for many of us a direct critique of the apartheid framework and the narrative used around Palestine. Not that it's a rejection per se, but just questioning how does that strategically play out, both within Palestine, within the North African and Southwest Asian region, and then how does that play out internationally in terms of developing relationships and allies to engage in the struggle. So we want to talk about that a little bit. Part of some of the things that we wanted to bring in part by way of analogy, but in part by way of trying to offer perhaps some perspective and some lessons from those of us who come from other settler colonial projects, which are perhaps considered to be a little bit more stable or advanced. And most of us, as you know, from the Canadian and U.S. Delegation, we wanted to make it clear that we come from, both of us come from settler colonial projects, where there's an ongoing legacy of genocide, colonization of indigenous and other captured peoples such as Africans, and these processes of both ethnic cleansing and genocide are ongoing. And they're very much part of the statehood project and very much part of the imperialist project, what some might call the foreign policy of both the Canadian and U.S. governments. So we wanted to kind of put that piece out because there's some lessons I think many of us would draw around if you don't really own up to that history, if you don't really address the root causes around that history, and you wind up making certain types of policies based on false premises, you wind up with solutions which basically enshrine inequality and legitimate inequality within kind of a constitutional framework, which is what, quite frankly, many of them want us to do. So I'll leave it at that and then just open it up if people have any comments or reflections on how the statehood question and the vote that took place yesterday has some impact on this discussion and framework. Feel free to, that's what we'll start with. Feel free to kind of chime in. Anyone?
Okay, so 137 countries yesterday voted in the United Nations to grant Palestine non-observer member status in the Indigenous Assembly. What in practicality this means that the for me, I will say my personal opinion, that Palestine can take Israel to the International Court of Justice. And this also means like what happened also with UNESCO, that Palestine, for instance, moved to consider Bethlehem, the Church of the Nativity, a world historic site. We are hoping that they will actually do more than that. There is a lot of places in Palestine that are being threatened. Israel is wiping out, and I don't know how many of you know that, for instance, Hayy al-Magharib, which is the Moroccan neighborhood in Jerusalem, was completely wiped out in 1967, which was actually the residence of the Palestinian, African Palestinians, Palestinians who came from Africa to fight with Salah ad-Din against the Crusaders, and it was wiped out completely to build the Wailing Wall in this place. So this is kind of like some of the examples that may be possible practically to be implemented as a result of the vote. I think that the vote in general, like symbolic, sort of like support for Palestine and so on. This is kind of an international level. On an international level, it's okay. I have a problem with the quote from another perspective, that the efforts of Palestine is sort of like seem to be kind of like Palestinian Authority seem to be wasted. The efforts of maybe not Palestinian efforts seem to be wasted on kind of like trying to get recognition after certifications, kind of like we can actually put on the wall hundreds awards that Palestine is being recognized. At the same time, there is no material realization of a statehood or sovereignty on Palestinian land. So I want to kind of say a couple of things that I think are really important. Of course, the United States and Israel vote against, but that's historically, it used to be the United States and Israel and South Africa. I mean, there is so many votes in the United Nations that used to be, so it's reflective of the kind of alliances. Okay.
Apartheid South Africa.
Yeah, of course, I mean, before, that was the situation. Now, one of the things that are very interesting that people are saying, I think this is going to come up in the news a lot, is that will the United States cut off the funds from the Palestinians and so on? One of the interesting things to keep in mind is that the United States is not going to cut off the funds, because Palestinian Authority, is the highest per capita place in the world in security arrangements, and the Palestinian Authority plays basically the protector of Israeli security, the coordination with Israel, all of this stuff. So why would the United States cut off the funds to the Palestinian Authority, which is basically a subcontractor to provide Israeli security? So this is kind of like, this is the problem, the kind of like the conflict between what's happening on the outside and what is the real situation between the form and the content. There is a huge contradiction between the two. So on the outside, it looks like, okay, everybody, and if you say I'm against Palestinian, people say, why are you against Palestinian right to self-determination? No. But is this what the Palestinian people should be really working for? Is this what the Palestinian Liberation Organization should be working for, and so on? If the efforts of the Palestinian Authority were combined with a clear project and strategy for the liberation of Palestine, for the return of the refugees, exercised yesterday was 65 years. I mean, we're talking about 4 generations now. If the Palestinian Authority were actually dealing with the question of discrimination against Palestinians inside Israel, if the Palestinian Authority were talking about all these issues, resistance, if Abu Mazen doesn't get on the Israeli TV and say that, I can only go visit my family's home in Safar, but I will never go there. And why won't you go there? Because this is Israel. I mean, like, voluntarily. I mean, nobody even pushed him to do that. So this is kind of like, and to me, it's reassertion of the internalized colonialism. That's extremely problematic. I think, there have been historical incidents, like the Algerians, for instance, in the 60s. They were negotiating at the United Nations, but at the same time, they were fighting. Okay? With us, the problem is that no, there's not going to be any fighting, and we are actually waiting for Israel to feel some kind of shame, and settler colonialism never does that, to come to the table and say to the Palestinians, here, we're going to give you the prisoners, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, which is clearly very problematic. Just one more thing I want to say, this is kind of like, so what do you do about it? And we were talking about local divestment sanctions, and this is why you were saying yesterday, Mohammed, that the Palestinian slide, BDS is light. Part of the problem is that the Palestinian Authority actually is against boycott, all boycotts. They are only for boycott of settlement goods in the settlements. So you can boycott the university in Ariel, and you can boycott the goods, the cheese or whatever is kind of produced on the settlements in the West Bank, but you're not supposed to be boycotting Israel, because Israel is not to be touched. Anything beyond the Green Line, or maybe more than 5 kilometers.
I think that the complexity of it is this in a number of ways. First of all, we have to understand that the authority, Palestinian Authority, has accepted the parameters of what to recognize and how far to proceed. They've given up the conception of the full liberation of Palestine, and they have accepted the framework of being the insurer of the rights of Israel as a state. So that limits how much they want to, what kind of weaponry in the struggle that they want to engage in, of which, of course, the boycott divestment is a very powerful weapon, and other aspects. I was thinking as a union person, I was still trying to think in terms of, once again, exactly what is it that's being given to the Palestinians, and it's somewhat like the union movement in the U.S., especially, where the state, the U.S. state, recognized the unions in the 40s, after very long battles of workers and led by the left, the radicals, who had a social view of unions being a transmitter for social liberation. The state incorporated the recognition of unions, but premised it on what? On how the unions would then interact with the state through a grievance process. They gave the unions a process of grievance and negotiations, and that became the substitute for the mobilization and organization of the workers. And I think that this is the stage where they gave the Palestinians a nominal grievance process internationally in place of an definite objective of ensuring nothing further goes beyond the development of the broad struggle of the Palestinian issues, ignoring the profound issues, the refugees, the right of return, which of course they have. So just, it may not be the absolutely accurate analogy, but I was thinking in terms of that, that's exactly somewhat fits into that kind of like what they gave. And also the authority, their objective is to bring back the Oslo track that is dead. They want to bring it back alive. And actually, when the Israelis especially when the Israelis talk about two-state, it's a subterfuge for the expansion of the occupation, because they've given up on and they've absolutely undermined. And there is really no reality to this two-state solution. It's false, especially given the facts on the ground. So that's, I mean, that's just what's in that. But I did want to like bring it to the settler colonial view, if you don't mind, because I was thinking about, you see, we're going to talk about settler colonialism, some similarities, some differences. In actuality, the Palestinian reality is similar to what's occurred to other settler colonials, and I'll speak specifically to the U.S. settler colonial, not necessarily specific to the U.S., but to its settler colonial realities of occupation and domination of Puerto Rico, Guam, Hawaii, and I may be missing one or two other places. In Puerto Rico specifically, what was the reality of the takeover of Puerto Rico in 1898? It was the total transformation and subterfuge of the economy and the political reality of Puerto Rico on the U.S. domain. And in the beginning, up until the 1952, where the U.S. shifted the direct colonial reality, where they used to appoint the military governor to control Puerto Rico, they implemented Abu Mazen, named Munoz Marin, and he was the guy who implemented and was the force behind the U.S. covering up, because the UN at that time considered Puerto Rico part of a colonial, it was part of the colonial status of countries that were under colonial domination. In order for the U.S. to get around that, they created this false identity of Puerto Rico being a nominally Commonwealth associated state with Puerto Rico, not necessarily part of a direct state of the U.S., but under the association of the U.S. And basically became a cover, and the UN removed Puerto Rico as a colonial state. And since then, the Puerto Rican reality has very similar to what's happened to the Palestinians. Puerto Rico suffered neoliberalism before we knew the form of the terminology. Puerto Rico became converted into a total dependent on the U.S. to the point where Puerto Rico was an agricultural, fishing island, and now all of the agriculture comes from the U.S. The fish, Puerto Rico, surrounded by the Caribbean, all the fish comes from Boston. That's sold in Puerto Rico. That's just in a nutshell. And I think that's what's happened to the Palestinians. And I know that the Palestinians, how the Israelis have made the Palestinians dependent on much of the Israeli economy, much of the goods and products, and even the most resistant, like my mother-in-law, who resisted as all hell to buy anything from Israel. There were sometimes it was unavoidable because there was nothing that could compare or contrast, or they undermined the economy in the local Palestinians, and that's what happened to Puerto Rico. And the same thing with Hawaii. Hawaii, they actually made it into a state, converted it, eliminated the existence of the indigenous people of Hawaii, to the point now when one thinks of Hawaii, they think of surfing. They forget that there's a colonial reality that existed. And the same thing with Guam, and I just leave it at that. But and again, another thing, see, but what's the situation for the Palestinians? Situation the same in Puerto Rico colonial status. They made the Puerto Rico economy and the working class and the people totally dependent on U.S. economy. So like I said, they destroyed, Puerto Rico was a premier coffee producing country. That's very limited now and it's not on the world market. I had to go to London to see Puerto Rican mango for the first time because it's not brought into the U.S. Okay, and the economic reality in Puerto Rico is where people have become dependent on service sector jobs, tourism jobs, which pay very minimal, or government-related jobs, which is very similar to the NGO process that we were familiar with. But again, in Puerto Rico, it was done before we became more familiar with the NGO process. And so that people who fight for independence, when you raise the question of independence, the argument is, well, gee, you become independent, then what? You lose all your benefits, you starve like the Cubans, you have no... So they develop this dependent relationship to the point where now they can become a chokehold on the question of whether you can expand and further the struggle for your own independence. And I think there's some analogy to Palestine and, of course, to other settler colonial realities.
Could I take that further back than what Jaime took it? Since we're talking about settler colonialism, I don't know if y'all know, but this is the 150th anniversary of the Dakota-U.S. War. And the state that I currently reside, Minneapolis, Minnesota, is a perfect example of the absolute removal of the Dakota people. The locating of them in quote, reservation concentration camps, and the activists and the radicals on the ground demanding the right to return, even in 2012, where Native American people have a so-called domestic dependent relationship. When you hear the term sovereignty, it's very qualified, a domestic dependent people. A year ago, when some of us went to Chicago for a protest against NATO and the G8, we developed a little bit of a document of the U.S. timeline around settler colonialism, white supremacist settler colonialism, because the racism piece is so profound in the U.S. case and certainly in the South African case. But let me just quickly, because I know we have this issue of apartheid and we want to hear about that. But this is the kind of timeline we developed from the 1400s to the 1700s. The global market system spread worldwide through colonialism, including military conquest and wars of genocide against indigenous people, the transatlantic slave trade and extensive use of slave labor in production for the world market, and the general exploitation and oppression of working people in the developing capitalist class. By the 1800s, the U.S. became the dominant imperialist force in the Western Hemisphere under the strategic direction of the Monroe Doctrine and Manifest Destiny, and extended to that imperial outside of the borders that you're talking about, honey. By the 20th century, hegemony over the Western Hemisphere, and it wasn't until the mid-20th century, coming out of World War II, that it was able to establish complete global hegemony. Of course, economic expansion was driven by what happened in World War II, a lot of popular struggles, decolonization struggles that emerged in that period. From the 1940s to the 1970s, the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF, World Bank, GATT, those things that we're still contending with today, and then the beginning of the crumbling around the edges of this empire, certainly by 73 with the global recession, and now this kind of military industrial war machine that keeps the economy going, which puts the Palestinian question right in the center of it. So we tried to develop a timeline that unfolds in this way. Just wanted to say that.
Do you have that available online?
Oh, I can get it to you online. I think we're getting
we got a sign-up sheet.
Yeah, and I can make sure you get copies of it.
So maybe we can start like taking a list of the resources that we need to share.
Right, and this is one of them that can be shared with everyone.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to, I feel like maybe what we could do is, I appreciated that you guys took the conversation into the sort of settler colonialism history, which is the focus of this panel, so that I could wait for my comments on the statehood to be relevant to that. I think, you know, there's something that's really interesting about the Palestinian conditions right now, which is it's actually so much easier for young Palestinians to see where we could be in 30 or 40 years than where we are right now and then where we have come from. And I think that that's really interesting, because in order to know what our role is in terms of sort of the organizing or the justice and liberation work that we're trying to do, it's so important to understand that history that led us up to this moment. It's so important to understand sort of the legacy of the movements that have come before us, the pitfalls, where our leadership was pigeonholed, where we made the wrong moves, where the trajectory changed internally before it became public, and where statehood came into a conversation about, you know, the conversation came into a conversation as a practical and tangible reality when we've been constructing and sort of driving ourselves and our relationships with our allies all over the world to be part of this liberation movement in Palestine and as Palestinians internationally, and that Palestine reflected for us this imperial settler colony, a microcosm of all of the sort of destruction of capitalism and imperialism that's happened all over the world. And I think there's the thing that I could say right now about like where, you know, a group like the Palestinian Youth Movement would come from is that this time is very scary for us. It was inevitable. We knew it would happen eventually. Maybe we were a little bit shocked, but it's scary for us because it's the actual point in which we're seeing an official shift from that traditional settler colonial model to the neo-colonial model. And then what I meant when I said it's easy to see the 30 or 40 years ahead of us is because we see the existing conditions in the entire global south, in the neo-imperial model, in the neoliberal model, the destruction and the sort of oppression in a new packaging of technology and surveillance and puppet regimes and dictatorships. And now we're sort of seeing ourselves in the heart of, okay, is this that transition point for us in an official way? I think in a practical way, there are questions that come up about the statehood bid. Of course, our people are celebrating. I'm not here to say I'm representing, you know, all of the Palestinian people. Of course, the Palestinian population is celebrating. We're coming out of 65 years of an ongoing occupation, and now are finally being recognized. Even if it's recognition and it's symbolic, there is this hope and this you know, hope is kind of all we have. I mean, if you don't have hope, what is there for us to believe in terms of the work that we're doing and how to proceed with like the sort of vision that we see for our country and for our people? So people are celebrating. But I think there's also the question of like, what are the practical implications of the statehood bid? What does that mean for the fact that everyone knew that the Oslo Accords were a failure long before they were even signed? And then we said, okay, well, we're just coming out of a brutal intifada in which our people were really crushed and our movements were destroyed. And, you know, our people have suffered long enough, let's go into this. And we were patient, and people said, wait, this takes time. And we're patient, and this interim authority that came in after Oslo that was supposed to be done by the late 90s ended up extending its sort of positionality or of its authority, exactly, until now. And they were not legitimate. They're not legitimate, and I don't think the question or the conversation is about legitimacy, because I think that's something that we get hung up on a lot, about representation and legitimacy. But not only were they not legitimate in the international community's eyes in a legal sort of periphery, but they're also not legitimate in terms of representing the aspirations of their people. They're not legitimate in terms of developing infrastructure and institutions on the ground in Palestine that was protecting their people. They're not legitimate in terms of addressing the issues like Jerusalem and like the refugees and all these other things that their people were, that the struggle and that our cause and a final solution was dependent on. And so now, in the last year, when young people sort of got this wind of energy coming through from the Arab revolutions to say, you know what, maybe we should stand up too. Maybe we should just stop being patient and stop being quiet and stop saying that, you know, this is just our situation and there's no power that we can do with it. Maybe there's another alternative. Maybe we need to seriously explore what is the role of the PLO, what should it be doing? What is the role of the PA, what should it be doing? And what is it doing? Comparing that to the actuality of what it was doing. And when that happened, our authorities seek legitimacy elsewhere. They said, okay, we're becoming continuously undermined and exposed for not representing the aspirations of our people both inside now and outside. And now let's go and try to seek recognition elsewhere. And that didn't happen. You know, we talk about the unilateral declaration of the Palestinian state. That unilateral declaration of the Palestinian state didn't happen while it was brought forth by the Palestinian people. It happened by being brought forth by a specific sector or group of the Palestinian people with also very serious political objectives and legitimacy objectives, and not just about statehood. So I think these are some of the questions that we're asking ourselves, because now that we have this sort of, even if it's not full membership and it's just recognition, but does this imply an actual legalization of this authority? And if this implies a legalization of that authority, and it implies a recognition of, an official recognition of 1967 borders, then what does that mean for the delegitimization of the role that the PLO was supposed to play? Now, I'm not saying that the PLO has been playing this role for the last 20 years, but the Palestinian people didn't give up on the PLO because we still believed in the role that it was supposed to play. So what does a statehood move mean for that role, for the Palestinian refugees who've been sitting for 65 years in refugee camps waiting to go back to their original homes and villages in Palestine? What does that mean for the Palestinian exiles and young generations who 3 generations later live in the far diaspora, are still thinking, breathing, feeling about Palestine, and see this as their struggle, and see this as a transnational struggle that they are a part of? What does that mean to them? What does that mean to the 70% of Palestinians who live outside of Palestine, and then the remainder of the 30% who live inside of Palestine who weren't even a part of the equation in this decision? So this is sort of the implications that I think we should be considering, while also understanding why Palestinian people, both inside and outside, would be in a place of celebration. We're in a place of celebration because we have been stuck in a time warp of 20 years in which our land has been annexed at rapid rates, our political conditions have been deteriorating, our people are suffering, the prisoners, the refugees, Jerusalem, all of this has gotten increasingly worse, sort of juxtaposed next to our movement being completely disarmed and crushed, and the internal sort of splits in national unity, which is not a split based on representation, but it's a split based on the lack of a political program or political project, has been sort of put on the sideline next to watching all of this deterioration and us not knowing how to move forward. So all of this is really important in the case of Palestine, because it literally is highlighting the contradictions between statehood and liberation movements, the contradictions between what is apartheid or what is sort of segregation and what is at the heart of settler colonialism. Settler colonialism includes the displacement of people. Some of them who live inside their border, the new empire or nation state's border, some who live outside. It includes apartheid, it includes exploitation of labor, it includes annexation of land and resources, it includes development of technology and surveillance that's practiced in the region and that's exported globally so that people in all over the world, governments all over the world, can use those practices and trainings and arms against their own people. And so this current time in Palestine is very, very relevant to sort of our longer term conversation about how do we understand settler colonialism historically, and how do we understand its continuous reformulation, expansion, and packaging, and the implications that that will have not only on political movements, but what it will have on actual people, on people's livelihoods on the ground who might not see themselves as a part of a political or liberation movement. And so these are just some of the things that I think are really important for us to consider in this time, while also keeping in our minds, like, yes, the Palestinian people were put in such a deadlock situation that we can understand where these celebrations are coming from, and we can understand why people feel very, very hopeful and very, very proud that Palestine is recognized as a state.
I'm sorry, I just want to add, but I think, I know there are people who want to speak, but I think, because there is another, I mean, I agree with you that there was some kind of despair, but I think we really need to remember that this comes on the heels of this amazing resistance from Gaza, where Palestinian factions, resistance factions, actually came together and responded to the Israeli attack and actually performed really well. And it was unity. I mean, this for a very long time, there hasn't been this kind of coming together and actually resisting and deterring an attack of Israel. So in one, I mean, you talk about kind of like the immediate objectives of Abu Mazen and the Palestinian Authority. I don't think Abu Mazen had any choice but to actually do this from the perspective of Abu Mazen. But there is resistance going on. So it's not that there isn't. There is. People are resisting by their bodies. But also what happened in Gaza was incredible. I mean, Israel looks really, really, really bad, even with the iron domes that they were getting from the United States and so on. So if you think about that, you do have models, maybe. And then also there was the bombing that happened in Tel Aviv and so on. There were people protesting in many places. So something was happening.
But I think, so part of the question, to bring in another aspect of it before we go to other people, one of the things in line with what you're saying, that I do now have a serious question and want some clarity on, as it relates to this forum in particular, because one of the broader aims of many of the people who put this together was to elevate the BDS campaign. How relevant is the BDS campaign now? If the Palestinian Authority, now de facto a Palestinian government, is in a position in some respects to veto certain aspects of the conduct of the campaign, and will actively be campaigning to end certain aspects of the campaign because it would be in violation of its international agreements with Israel and the United States. So how does that factor in? How do we think about that? You know, what guidance should we be taking from the Palestinian movement now on how do we, what actively can we do, those of us who are not Palestinian, what actively can we do? Because the tactical aspects are being kind of taken off the table. And there's more of a need for some strategic direction coming from different forces within Palestine, so we are clear on what we can do, how we can engage. So,
Zakaria Odeh. In fact, in order to judge what's going on or what happened.
Raise your voice, Zakaria. You got a strong voice. Come on now.
In order to judge what happened, especially yesterday at the UN, whether it's really a victory or not, it's important to take in consideration to look on the ground what's being considered or what's been going on. We shouldn't forget that the West Bank and Gaza, which what we call between two brackets, it is the state, that it is nearly 28% of historic Palestine, which is fragmented two pieces of land where there is no continuity. Even if there is a solution which gives us a state on the full land that occupied in 1967, still we should ask ourselves, is this viable for a state or not? We have to take in consideration that 47% of the land on the West Bank is really under the direct control of the Israeli government or occupation. More than 85% of the water resources is really used and controlled by the Israelis. Let's look at as well Jerusalem, where only 13% of the land of Jerusalem that occupied in 1967 is only left for the use of the Palestinian, while 73% is really completely controlled by the Israelis for the sake of settler colonialism in East Jerusalem and in the rest of the West Bank. And nearly over 500,000, nearly 600,000 settlers now, they live in the West Bank. 210, they live in East Jerusalem only by itself. The economy of the Palestinians is really under full control. The borders, the air, everything. So even, as I said, even if we get the full land of 67, still we will be under the mercy. We have the Jordan from the east, Jordanian government, and we know all of us historically what's the relation, the position of the Jordanian monarchy or government, and we have Israel. So without being with some kind of relation with these two states, it's difficult for any entity in the West Bank to survive. And you know, you have Israel, which is like the fifth developed state on the world in IT and industry, and you have Jordan from the other side. So we can imagine what type of economy we can have in the West Bank and Gaza. I believe the voting yesterday is the first step towards killing or ending what we talk about the right of return. Because I think the Israelis, although they make all this fuss about it, but I think they love that, they want that. They want that this issue of West Bank and Gaza to be institutionalized internationally through the UN and upon the request of the Palestinians. I think they want that, but they have been threatening, they have been against it. They are threatening to stop the money for the Palestinians from tax, and the Americans, they are doing the same. But in spite of that, I think they love and they want to do that. What is the objective? What's the benefit from what we are doing? The PLO has been having an observer status in the United Nations long time ago, and since the 70s. So the only thing that the BA can take the Israeli leaders, whether military or others, for criminal court of justice for the crime that they are going to be committed. But let us ask ourselves, do we believe that the BA will do that? All of us, we remember after the war in Gaza, the first war in 2008, Goldstone report. What did the BA do? Goldstone report was a very powerful card in the hand of the Palestinians and mainly the Palestinian Authority, but they didn't follow up. They didn't take any action in order to punish Israel or to do something about it. Let's ask as well why Mahmoud Abbas went to this. I mean, the UN has been for a long time. Why now we remember that we should go to request? I think because he found that he has been since Oslo going on in a negotiation process which really didn't give him anything. Which we did, I mean, the Israeli leaders, they haven't really offered the Palestinians anything, even based on Oslo, which really undermined the right of the Palestinians. So then if all of this happening, why the Palestinians are celebrating? Everybody talking yesterday. You know, I mean, the Palestinians, anything upset the Israelis, they do opposite. They do it. Anything. Even if this deal in the United Nations is not that the great deal really that will achieve an independent Palestinian state, still the Palestinians will do it. Anything that upset Israelis because of the situation, people who have been living for 45 years of occupation, 65 years of Nakba, they are frustrated. International community are not really taking any action to stop this misery situation on the hand of the Israelis, neither the Americans nor the Europeans, and even nor the Arabs. They are not doing anything. So people, anything, it's a kind of moral spirits celebration. So they have been celebrating because they know the Israelis that are getting upset, even if it's a superficial on the papers and many other things that what has been happening, but still Palestinians are celebrating. So that's why when Palestinians talk about one state for everybody, because we believe this is the only solution, and this what ends apartheid, what ends discrimination and settler colonialism. Without this, I think there will be no solution for the Palestinian, no just solution for the Palestinian. That's why I believe your struggle and our struggle shouldn't be affected by what happened yesterday, by all the, we shouldn't be fooled that, okay, the state is coming next year or after a year. So I think it's very important that we should continue and support BDS and the boycott, because it's really one of the main mechanisms that really can affect the Israelis, and it has been hurting the Israelis. Thank you.
Well, I was thinking about what I was going to talk about on this panel for about a week, but it sort of changed several times. I'm reminded, I went to Palestine recently, and so I had an opportunity to talk to a black radio station while I was there. They tried to track me down and asked me why was I there, and what was the things that I wanted to bring back home. And so I couldn't really think of anything to say. I said, well, this is my second time here, and this time I'm thinking about if indigenous people in what we call the United States now had the opportunity to have people visit them like we were visiting Palestinians 400 years ago, what would the world look like now? And they asked me, did I have an answer for that? And I said, no, but maybe our Palestinian struggle gave a lot of us people of color an opportunity to try to redraw the world's map. Maybe we can't redraw the world's map, but we can begin to think differently. Now, it's interesting that we talk about settler colonialism in this workshop when those of us who come from the United States rarely have an opportunity to talk in any formal gathering or in any educational gathering about settler colonialism. It's never talked about. It's sort of what those real radical crazy folks talk about when they're by themselves. Let's be for real. And even in South Africa, because South Africa was our shining point of about 20 years ago. Some of us was very involved in the anti-apartheid struggle in the U.S. That was our work for some of us who worked for peace organizations. And there's a distinction that I want to make right here, that because there were so many African Americans in the U.S., there was an understanding that they had to let us work on South Africa. I'm speaking as someone who worked for a white peace organization that's international in scope for about 20 years, that there were so many African Americans in the U.S. that you had to sort of let them work on South Africa, because we don't want to really get them upset, because then they'll begin to rethink some of the crazy stuff that goes on, some of the compromises like Khalid brought up. You know, because each time we run into these engagements, we learn about ourselves. We have to rethink where we are. And so it's interesting that people of color, all who were activists and organizers, and were pretty progressive and radical, we were doing a lot of work on South Africa. We were doing work on all kinds of issues around the world. And then my sister, my friend, Rabab, who we happened to run into each other because she spoke at this white peace organizations thing, because she was a Palestinian. White peace organizations aren't afraid of Palestinians as long as you come in 1 and 2s. I mean, you know, because you can come and you can talk. Change doesn't come as individuals. Change comes because we come together as groups, as communities. And so she came to speak, and then I think she got to meet the person who was my boss at the time, Rosemary Kubas, who invited her to come and join with us and talk with us and stuff. And so Rabab shows up, and she kind of throws the challenge out there. I want to know how you people of color can talk about and work on any damn thing but Palestine. And we had to think about that. And the reason we had to think about it is because this was the last bastion. The white folks would let us talk about anything. We might not get a whole lot accomplished, but at least we could talk about it. We weren't allowed to really talk about or use their resources to do any organizing around Palestine. And some of it, they say, well, you know, you're anti-Semitic. You know, and you know you can't be objective. Because those of you who endured slavery, and those of you who've been illegal immigrants, and those of you who've been colonized, oh, hell, how dare you let you try to be objective? You can't see this thing. You got to see both sides, you know? And so that was sort of like the kind of introduction to working around Palestine. But I want to say that most of my work around Palestine has been more about learning about African people in America and what we need to do. Every time I go to Palestine, I learn more about where I'm from than I know about Palestine. And that was why I was going to tell you that I can't really talk a whole lot about Palestine and Palestinian politics. That's not my expertise. But every time I go there, I learn about us. And I can tell you, I was a big part of doing some of the anti-apartheid work, was part of the national organizing and planning for the Coca-Cola boycott. We knew damn well we couldn't bring Coca-Cola down. I've been here in Brazil, you can hardly buy a soda unless it's Coca-Cola. I mean, you know, and even in Palestine, everywhere you go, Coca-Cola is. But we did something. We managed to bring Coca-Cola to come talk to us. Coca-Cola sent its #1 black man to Philadelphia to meet with black folks in a basement and figure out what could they do. What can we give them to stop this? And the reason, we were negotiating with the ANC, and some of us still had connections to the PAC, and we were talking with them because you know you can't define how other people struggle. We're supposed to be in support, and so we said we need to do this Coca-Cola campaign because we need to educate people in the U.S. about what's going on there and here. And Coca-Cola gives us a handle to do that. And I raise that because as we talk about BDS and folks talk about with now the new structure that you've agreed to, if you're sort of a government in waiting an informal government for Palestine, then you come into some agreements that you can't be advocating things that bring back down the demise of Israel if you're in agreement with them. Well, I think that there's some ways that we need to do BDS, and I'm not Palestinian, and I can only speak for Darryl, and you can criticize me, say anything you want, but my challenge is that we need to find some things that we can target, that we can begin to educate the regular folks, the masses. That's what matters. In regards to Coca-Cola in South Africa, there were elementary and middle school kids who have begun to take on the mantle and the struggle about South Africa in the U.S. You know, they knew more about South Africa, some of them, than they knew about the struggle of the Civil Rights Movement, because it was in their face. We gave them something that they could do. They was kicking Coca-Cola out of schools, you know. They would say, oh, no, can't have that here, you know. And they forced their parents to take a stand, you know. And when we were there, and so this is my thing. When I was in Palestine about a month ago, every goddamn where we went that they had a new settlement or whatever, we seen Ace Hardware. Now, I can tell you now, I haven't done the research, so I can't tell you a whole lot of stuff. But in the United States, Ace is the place with the helpful hardware man. For what it means, Ace is the place for the helpful hardware man. They're friendly, they're helpful, and they're all about the good stuff. You know, they got a great reputation. But they're in Israel, and they're helping people build these settlements. They're contributing to it because their presence is there. Clearly, as a hardware store, they're allowing people to continue to build up this stuff. And for a lot of the settlers that leave the U.S., they go there and they're subsidized to live at a level that they could never live in the U.S. I mean, you know, just so that they can steal Palestinian land and try to redo what they did in the United States a long time ago. Coming back to that parallel where we can sit in a room here and talk about settler colonialism, but rarely do we have the opportunity to have those discussions with the people that we work with and the people that we sit on the bus with or that we party with or whatever. I think that this becomes a point that we need to begin to talk about how we educate each other. And that we should be talking about settler colonialism and what has happened because of settler colonialism in the U.S. and in South Africa in ways that people say, we cannot let this happen in Palestine. And I had to ask a colleague because I wasn't even straight. I asked him, I said, is this the 21st century we talking about now? In the 21st century, you mean to tell me that we're going to let the same thing happen that happened 400 years ago in the U.S.? It might not be exactly the same, but we're talking about the same bullshit where white people based on the Bible get to come in and take the land because God gave it to them. I mean, you know, it didn't make no difference who was sitting on it. God gave me this land, and so I get to take it, and if you don't want to move, we'll kill you and move you, but that's okay, you know. And so, yeah, it looks kind of different. In South Africa, it didn't go that route. Some of us had hopes for a different kind of ending in South Africa, and so I won't bore people with what our hope was in the communities that I grew up in. There wasn't an ANC slogan, but there was a slogan that used to come out of South Africa when I was a teenager. And I'm 58 right now. But when I was a teenager, we used to love that slogan about march them into the sea. I can't remember the exact same thing, but those folks from South Africa do know, whether you like it or not, and I take all the blame for whatever I bring up here, but the PAC had a slogan about march the, we call them settlers in Palestine right now, but so it would be march the settlers into the sea. I can't remember what we used to call them, what we used to call them in South Africa. Yeah, march them into the sea. But so that was a way of saying that South Africa belonged to the South Africans, and that there was nobody that was supposed to be there dictating what that reality was supposed to be. Unfortunately, I profess to my own ignorance. I'm not a professor, so my history is sort of like bootleg from the grassroots. In some ways, there were people in the United States who was part of making the same compromises in 1964 and 65, who were brought into the dialogues in regards to South Africa and what South Africa was going to look like. Because they were projected to be international heroes in the African American community, they were exported to South Africa as we began to build relationships with the South African struggle. It wasn't the grassroots folks who was out there boycotting Coca-Cola and doing other kinds of things, trying to make sure that South Africans got a chance to rule their own country. But it was those same people that was managing black folks in the U.S. who became the ambassadors from the U.S. that weren't white, who could go there and talk to South Africans because we both looked alike. And so they went over there and they began to talk that bullshit. And next thing we know, there was compromises made. The apartheid kind of thing, which means apart kind of thing, just remind us of separate but equal, you know, Jim Crow South kind of bullshit. And so what you come up with is this equal rights thing, you know. And so South Africans end up with a concept more akin to equal rights than this is our land and we own it right now. And so now we come to the part, I hope I'm not making anybody upset, but maybe sometimes we need to be upset. Then now we come to the point where Palestine is facing the same kind of junction, you know, about whether or not they're going to be faced with, in order to get international recognition, both the PA and Hamas. I mean, God forbid I raised the question about Hamas, but some folks, me and some brothers, we were sitting there, we're watching, and all of a sudden they showed the picture of the leader of Hamas, and then he's in discussions, indirectly or directly, or whatever they want to play the game is. We talk, Hillary Clinton is in this goddamn discussion. Yeah. So hold on. So you've stepped up to have a discussion with Hillary Clinton. Just like I say, I got to own up to my own ignorance. I'm not an expert in Palestinian history and politics or whatever. But those of us in the United States know that when the United States get into the deal, it usually gets twisted up. And so that some of us are afraid that Palestine is going to end up into some negotiations that mean that you'll be struggling for equal rights, because those of us in the United States know that even when they give you civil and equal rights, you still ain't got nothing. And so that's what I wanted to say. I know it's not really a statement, it's not really a question, it's not really facts or whatever, but it's some thinking that I can throw out on the table that many of us who long to see you get better are hoping that you get better, because we know that if Palestine can manage to become the landlords of Palestine, rather than Israel continue to be the landlords of Palestine, then that gives us some hope. Because then that means that you've thrown off the rope of Israel and you've made some space in the U.S. for us to push those folks in a further corner. And for some of us, that's the hope. That's the hope we're trying to keep alive.
Just to give some context, you mentioned one thing there about we can't have certain conversations about the U.S. context. There have been and are, they're very weak now, national liberation movements within the United States, within the 48 borders. There's the Chicano liberation movement for Aztlan. There's different indigenous movements. There's the New African Independence movement. These movements were brutally repressed in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And when you hear many of us talk about political prisoners and prisoners of war who are in the United States, these are the representatives of those movements who, if they weren't killed or sent into exile, we have a number of exiles who live in Cuba from these movements, they were put in prison. And they represent these particular struggles that were struggling for national liberation within what's considered the 48 territorial states of the United States, the circumscribed land. So That's a discussion that is now hardly ever had with anybody in the United States or outside the United States. That many of us, a couple of us, myself included, come out of those struggles and bring that perspective with us.
And I'm glad you brought that in, because I felt that just saying that 64 and 65 happened wasn't sufficient.
Right.
As a matter of fact, the brutal suppression of this alternative energy was very systematic. So those dynamics were going on simultaneously. And what was left standing was what you described. So I'm glad you put that in there, because that, that deepens what we had to deal with.
So when some of us are talking about settler colonialism, we're not talking about it from a U.S. perspective. We're not talking about it in the abstract. We're talking about how it directly impacts us. As African people, as Puerto Ricans, as indigenous peoples, as Chicanos, and how this project continues to perpetuate, and how they've done a masterful job of incorporating folks from our communities and even from our movements into this project, to the point where now some of us never thought in our lifetime we'd see a person of African descent be the President of the United States. That moment is here.
But the price of the ticket.
What's the price of the ticket, right? So we had a couple of people I want to come to. There was Monadel, then Thandile, and then Rabab.
I first want to say I really appreciate the spirit of this discussion. It's extremely important to hear our allies and our sisters and brothers from different countries. I don't see the necessity for us to be experts on the history of Palestine. I see a lot of similarities, just like by hearing the different experience, whether the brother from South Africa or brothers who came from the United States and talking about the settler colonialism. The history of the struggle of Palestine did not start 10 years ago, 20 years ago with the negotiation. Rather, it is started with settler colonialism of the region back in 1917 when the British gave the declaration, Balfour Declaration, to the Zionist movement and given this is a homeland for you. And that is the struggle, the continuous struggle of Palestine from against the settlers in Haifa and Yafa then, and in the strike of port workers in 1929 until the victory of the Palestinians. I echo what Rabab was saying about the unity of the different political factions. They are united when we are carrying really the heart of the problem, which is the Zionist attack on the Palestinian people, where you see people are united and defending their dignity, their identity, their national character. Now, just to go back with the path of negotiation, it was also has surfaced because of the balance of power. It came right in 91 after the Gulf War, the Iraqi First War, and also after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the socialist countries and whatever, and the whole liberation movements throughout the world suffered a setback. Then we had something called Madrid negotiation. And on the end of Madrid negotiation with the different sides, with Russia in the last days of Russia, Soviet Union then, and different, like Spain, it was in Spain, and it was like an international setting. Ishaq Shamir, the Prime Minister of Israel, said, he said, we want the negotiation to continue to be 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. Okay? We want to negotiate. In the meantime, the negotiation started, and they started building a new reality in the ground. Similar to what Zakaria was saying about Jerusalem, about building settlements and everything. Now, what happened in the United Nations, I'm just bringing that up so we see the picture. What happened is not surprising in the United Nations yesterday, but also we cannot exaggerate a victory about what happened, nor we can, undermine it. It's something that has happened. It is to steer our way from talking about improving and aligning ourselves with the liberation movements to start to talking about state, therefore contain us, like they contained the in 64 and 65, like they talk about the end of the apartheid in 94. It did not end it, but knowing we are in a healthy discussion right now, knowing that our global unity, understanding the imperialism and understanding the colonial settler in the world. Therefore, we see the battle for a free Palestine, and that's the name of this forum, is a battle for the freedom of all people against poverty, against what's happening right now. It's not by coincidence. That is, we living in a fluid Middle East. Egypt is still not in a stable situation. And yesterday, Yahud Olmert is saying, yeah, I agree with that. He's disagreeing against Netanyahu and the Israeli government, is saying, yeah, we should support the Palestinian bid for state, which making a split inside the Israeli, talking about this is supporting the containment of Palestinians under the PA as long as they don't bring Hamas into the picture. So this dynamics should not blind us, or should not have us just talk about what has happened is significant, but it will do nothing but keep us struggle more and look about the commonality with all of us, including and not limited to the government of Brazil, who's continue to have economic relationship with Israel, South Africa, the country South Africa having this, and then expose the Zionist influence with all different institutions who are trying to silence our activists, to censor us inside the United States. To talk about people when the minute they feel that there is an impact, no matter how small it is. You're talking about Palestine, they start, attacking you by, being anti-Semitic and all this, crap that still belonged to back a long time ago. But it is really bring us a new, what Loubna was saying, that we have a shift right now. We really need to expose these enemies, to expose the forces that exploits the people are the same enemies that support the colonial state of Israel, and that's really a new level of solidarity. And that's why I think that's what we would elevate this level of solidarity, where we all are in solidarity with each other. We just need to understand more about each other's situation.
So just so folks know, Thandile, Rabab,
okay, what I'd like to maybe just to try and bring the debate back to the BDS campaign. I think the Palestinian cause, especially in South Africa where I come from, has fallen victim to it has become a money spinner, a big enterprise of people using it to make money, and people using it to, and the point I made earlier about the oppressors championing the oppressed cause applies as well to the Palestinian cause, where you have unreformed racists championing the Palestinian cause. And that explains the reason why the Palestinian cause has not gained traction in South Africa amongst the majority of the population, which is the African population. You speak about the PAC. I did not reveal that it was the official paid my ticket. That's my political home. My father was trained in exile for the PAC military in Apla. He came back to South Africa, got detained, escaped, went back to Tanzania, came back in 1990, died in 1996, a poor man, treated as a criminal, and even today there are Apla combatants who are in South African jails, treated as pure criminals. The case of George Wauchope, a black consciousness activist who was in exile in the UK, the South African government, the current ANC government, refused him and to go back into his country because they treated him as a criminal. He had to die in England, and then his ashes were brought back in South Africa. So you have those kinds of situations where the Palestinian cause has not been able to gain traction in South Africa because the people championing it
dodgy people, if I may say so. You have racists championing the cause of the Palestinians. And the African people are saying, if these people would treat us like threats in their own houses, are going to come here and tell us that we should be supporting the Palestinians. In fact, before I came here, I was telling my friend of mine, who's also from the Pan-Africanist political inclination, that I'm coming here to this. They said, no, but we have enough problems as Africans for you to be going on something for the Palestinians. But I reminded him that our political mentor said that, you know, the cause that we're fighting for is the noblest cause on earth, the liberation of humankind, not of Africans. So I want to say that you need to, as Palestinians now, you need to guard against, you need to guard or decide or be very vigilant about the people who champion your cause in each and every country. Because we have people where, I'm from the Muslim community as well, and I know the Muslim community, most people will say maybe there's a lunatic fringe, which I happen to be part of. We call the lunatic fringe. Those who insist to say that there's racism here, lots of racism. And people pretend that all is well because we are Muslims, we will prostrate together, but not all is well. There's a big racist thing in the Muslim community that alienates. In fact, you know, this one brother said that Muslims have been in India for so many years, but they left people worshipping cows there. And the reason that they left people worshipping cows because they could not, were not able to pass on the message. Just like they do in South Africa, where Muslims have been there for hundreds of years, but only 2% of the population is Muslim. The reason is because there's a cabal of racists who control, now with the Muslims, who control everything. And now when they champion this cause and try to make this, you see the BDS campaign in South Africa will be limited, will have very limited success because of this. In order for it to be very successful, you need to take it to the people on the ground, but you need to choose the right people to take it there. You can't take unreformed racists and want them to champion an anti-racist cause.
Yeah, I'm not going to respond to it because I don't know what you were challenging. You said you were challenging me, but we can clarify.
No,
go ahead. Yeah, because I wasn't. I mean, I wasn't celebrating this. I was saying there are some tools actually in the bid for statehood that can be used if there is a movement that can use them the way the Algerians did when they were negotiating. That was a different situation. This is not what we have in Pakistan. But anyway, I think.
So we're on the same page.
Yeah. Okay. But I think I want to mention. I want to speak to a few points. One is that the question of settler colonialism, and I think the framework of settler colonialism, I think, is the most appropriate framework for us to understand what's going on in Palestine, which has become. I mean, now it's sort of back, which has to do also with the Palestine solidarity industry, as I call it. It's an industry with all the neoliberal capitalism, all trappings of it. It's very sexy and it's very fashionable, and I think it's kind of like that has faded away in the colonialist perspective, and then people refer to it as a conflict. As if it's a dispute, you just get people in a room, and this is the US way. Let them talk, and then things will be resolved and so on. And I think, but I want to also talk about that, and if we understand, a lot of us understand Palestine as settler colonial project. It is a settler colonial project. And if we lose sight of that, we are actually on the wrong track, because then our tools for resisting that, for understanding what's going on, as well as our alliances become affected with it. And okay, so then I want to talk about the US, because I think people talked enough about South Africa. Maybe we can come back to that too. But I think in the United States also, I think we do not analyze enough, and we do not understand enough, and we do not refer enough to the question of indigenous people. And I was really happy that, Rose, you also brought it up there. And by the way, this is kind of like why a lot of people could not join us, because there is 150 years of the Dakota, and then people are really busy. And November is the busiest month for indigenous people in the United States. They have too much, so it's kind of like, and also a lot of us, and to talk about the World Social Forum, a lot of us also have a lot of misgivings about the World Social Forum. So maybe we apply our own analysis also and the critique to this being part of the Palestine solidarity industry in terms of the good stuff and the bad stuff. Okay, so I think indigenous people, we really need to kind of like keep thinking about that. And also there are people still fighting, the Leonard Peltiers of the world, and I mean And so I think I've been like talking, and Loubna and I and a whole bunch of people, we've been talking about how do we receive a lot of delegations. We as Palestinians receive a lot of delegations in Palestine. And I agree with you there, because kind of like when people go, there's a lot of questions that come up that refer it back to the US. And I've experienced that with delegations. But I think we also as Palestinians, and I'm raising this as a challenge to my comrades, my sisters and brothers here, we've been talking about this, we need to also reciprocate. We need to be visiting communities who are in solidarity, real solidarity. And I'm talking meaning of solidarity to the 18th century, not to the way, the wishy-washy propaganda stuff that's going on today. But how do we do that? How do we understand the intricacies of what happens at the US border or Mexico border, the same way that people who go from different parts of the world to Palestine understand the apartheid war? How do we understand that? How do we understand what happens on the reservations? What do people experience? I think this is the kind of the stuff that gets people to really understand. I think that would be really one of the things that we really need to kind of like emphasize. And we need to understand also, and what I think about also Israel and the United States, in this, there are some differences also. So yes, and there is the indigenous situation. And then people say, well, what the Palestinians are going through in Palestine is very similar to what happened to the black people in the US. It is not the same. It is not the same. Or some people say, well, it is what happened to the black people in the US is the same what happened to Jews from Arab and Muslim, Arab and third world. It is not the same, because it was the Jews who came from Arab and other third world parts were not kidnapped, enslaved, and the legacy had lasted for so many years. It is a very different situation. So I think, kind of like the relationship between the African Americans and the indigenous people in the United States, it is not the same as the relationship between Palestinians and Jews of color in Israel. And because a lot of people keep saying this is the same and so on, and they refer to the Black Panthers. And I think it's really, really important for us to be very clear, politically and very clear analytically and very clear historically about where are the limitations of comparisons and where they start. There are certain things that we are united in struggle and so on, but we also, even the strategic alliances that we talk about, we cannot assume that there are strategic unless we work on them. I mean, we really need to work on them. And when you're talking about the racism of some communities, the whole question of class, the whole question of the entitlement, the whole question of how people benefit from the system, really needs to be addressed. So I think Muhammad was speaking yesterday about light again, and I think this whole BDS light is kind of like, let's sell it as sort of a civilized package of the way people can support Palestine without them really being affected with it. Since when has the struggle been okay to be light and not be affected with it, and you only take it up at cocktail hours? I mean, I'm saying it kind of like push that back. The point is very, very important. People only talk about this, kind of, oh yeah, like let's have a cocktail party and raise money and so on. But keep in mind that you're only doing this because it's a tool to get to what you want, not becomes the end goal in itself. So I think the kind of like even the way we do the work, I think we really need to kind of like keep in mind. You civilian, by the way, yes, are the people who are the people. Which people you're referring to? Which are your people? What are your constituencies? Are we talking to the average Joe Schmo who was part of the Beer Summit? For people who don't know the United States, this is when Skip Yates was profiled outside of his house in Harvard. And then the solution was, the teachable moment was for Obama to invite the Skip Yates and the policeman who profiled him to have beer at the White House. This was the teachable moment. Okay, this is how we can resolve. We sit down and have beer. Okay, and it is. So I think this is not the way. And we have different constituencies. And I think even if we assume that we do understand each other, we do not always understand each other, and we really need to work on it. So it is not okay. It is not okay for profiling, and we had it at some of our meetings, to think about, all Arabs, all Palestinians, all Palestinian militants, or Palestinian radical militants, comrades, sisters, and brothers, have to answer for all the racist stuff that Arab merchants may do in Brooklyn or in Ecuador. I mean, why are you holding me? I mean, this is really racism, okay? At the same time, we also should not be explaining for Palestinian merchants who may be selling cigarettes and liquor to kids.
in black and Latino neighborhoods. I mean, so I think we need to kind of like, if we are actually in the same struggle, and it also depends on the language we use and how we speak with each other, and do we speak from antagonistic or we speak from like really joint struggle perspective, which is what we are coming here. So it's not about just solidarity. No, it is about solidarity, but it's not about the kind of solidarity that has become fashionable, that people do it after hours, in the evening or whatever, whenever they have time to do it and so on, and don't hold themselves accountable. We need to be holding ourselves accountable, and we need to go back kind of relations with each other and be very critical of ourselves as we're doing it. Because if we want people to work with us, we have to be role models. We can't be doing things that then asking others to do.
Everybody said, I'm going to try to say something new that wasn't just said in the last few minutes, because everything that was said I resonated with more and more. It's been a lot of talk about kind of like being at a crossroads, paralleling it with other points of crossroads, and I really just want to, there's a few things I want to say, so if I remember them all, if I don't, then hey. But at the crossroads, I really want to just speak to this notion of not just keeping alive the struggle, but really looking back to what it meant for the struggle to be aligned with freedom fighting, what it meant for the struggle to be aligned with liberation, and also specifically not just as ideas, but the specific relationships. The specific relationships, and I speak from personal experience, as was mentioned in the black community, with all the repression that came after the 64 to 65, going into the 60s and 70s, which was before I was born. Then I come along in the late 70s, and then I grow into adulthood somewhere between the 90s and 2000. But I say that in terms of what was not there as I was coming into my activism. Because of that distance of time, what didn't I get? Darryl and I have been exploring a lot of this on this trip, but if the struggle disappears in a certain kind of way, you get a preponderance of nonprofits. You get the sentiment that Barack Obama is the culmination of the struggle. You get, not just to mention just a community that is very challenged to respond to the issues in the community. The community is just shit happening and people can't hardly get it together to respond. And sometimes you have those subjective moments in Detroit where you're just like, man, our movement is just in a very weak place right now. And that is a result of those gaps that came from that repression and the gaps that were not filled. So I just wanted to offer that in terms of being at this crossroads. And to me, that ties into this whole notion of solidarity. I say that because I think that it's a very old school value that some of my elders have taught me, and then Rabab pulled my coat and started kicking it a certain kind of way. But the old school value is like, it's not solidarity. It's not just like something that you do because you have a lot of spare time and you see something that's going on in the world that's important. And what I would call community to community, or what I would call people that are engaged in struggle, communities that are engaged in struggle relating to each other. And it is difficult. I mean, it is a question of, you know what I'm saying, if you got folks that's struggling to eat, struggling to keep safety around them, why should they relate to other people? It's good to get to that question. Don't ignore that question. It's good to get to that question. And it's good. I've been very influenced in the last 2 or 3 years. A big part of my development comes out of the United States Social Forum. One of the principles that the United States Social Forum put, which the World Social Forum has yet to take up, is the leadership of oppressed people when it comes to social change, as a principle that is not to be compromised. And it's not saying that, the ones that have the most money should be the leaders, or the ones that can be the most effective can be the leaders, or the ones that do the most research should be the leaders. And that has really affected me and affected my outlook. And I don't even, in addition to some of the elders and nationalists that have shown me various things, but I think that in terms of solidarity, I think that for me it's like, yo man, these people that's coming from privilege, they don't have what it takes to lead this movement. I don't want to follow them. I don't want to, somebody that just looks and says, oh, I want to help you, get out of here, man. Or maybe don't get out of here, but get back. At least let's say, let's have a critical discussion about your role. How about that? But I think that that's also that gap, you know what I'm saying? And that gap is some of the organic mechanisms have been lost. So he's like, oh, it's a vacancy. Nobody's doing nothing about this Palestine thing. Come on, let's have a meeting. You know, come on, we gotta help them. This so, you know, at the panel yesterday, the sentiment was, this is so important. I gotta do something about it. You know, that's a very dangerous sentiment. It's not a terrible sentiment. It's just a dangerous sentiment.
Wait, the panel that you were on yesterday?
Yes. And I think that this discussion that we're having here, and I really think that this notion that keeps getting repeated of, yo man, we in business, taking care of our own business, making these things in our own communities, but we see that it's a struggle for humanity. It's a struggle against capitalism. It's a struggle against militarism. It's all these things, and we're compelled to figure out how to aid your support. You know what I'm saying? And to me, just from some of the things, you know, I got pictures of elders that went down to Africa, participated in various movements. I consider that a very old school value, you know? And so I wrap it up by saying that it's an honor to be here. Thank you for listening to me.
Back here.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what somebody else had said. The discussion really has an energy which is appreciated. Also thanks to comrade from South Africa, Thandile, for also critically discussing South Africa. You know, it's sometimes held up as a model that should be followed, exact, but it actually has quite a lot of contradictions, not only the struggle against apartheid, but also the current apartheid, or the current South Africa that we live in. You know, racism has this ability, or supremacy has this ability, of moving from, say, a political or a cultural realm into an economic realm. I mean, this is what happened really in the civil rights movement to a large extent, but also in South Africa, where you had racism, where we had political gains being made, but racism and supremacy had already moved into another realm that perpetuated the oppression that you were up against. Thandile, you know that at the Apartheid Museum, we have these big pillars in Johannesburg. The one is written peace, the other is written reconciliation, the other is written multiculturalism. But the PAC nor the ANC, I mean, these were not the values that were being fought for. Peace, I mean, it was actually the anti-peace that was driving the movement inside South Africa. And so I think that at the center of our struggles in South Africa, within our social movements generally, but also in Palestine, justice needs to be placed at the center of our work. I'd also like to say that, look, I mean, I'm not sure that when we are in solidarity with a certain struggle, or when we take on a certain struggle, we don't take this on necessarily because we need Palestinians who we are in solidarity with to also take on our issues, or to also take, it's a selfless thing. We stand in solidarity because of our interconnectedness. We stand in solidarity because of our shared humanity. We don't stand in solidarity because South Africans never, people who stood in solidarity with South Africans in their hundreds of thousands, if not their millions, didn't do this because they were waiting for something else to be paid back. Yes, in a larger sense, of course, we're waiting for of course, in a larger sense, we expect a certain comradeship in our struggles, but not you need to do this, then I do. No, I mean, this is a selfless thing. And we must be unashamed and we must be unembarrassed in taking a very strong position, whether it's in support of whether it's in support of Palestinian solidarity or any other issue. It was outside the South African embassy, and I do make a differentiation between apartheid South Africa and today's South Africa, however flawed it may be. Outside the apartheid South African embassy in Washington, where a civil rights activist was asked, but why stand in solidarity with people thousands of kilometers away when you have your own issues here, when you have your own systematic racism in this country? And she answered that we can chew gum and walk at the same time. I mean, in South Africa, we had a similar slogan: you can run and shoot at the same time. But we use the civil rights movement. But basically, I mean, we need to figure out how do we take on the struggles in South Africa, Thandile and others that are from Tukelo, how do we take on student struggles and at the same time we're also in solidarity with other struggles with other people. I think that this is really the challenge to our interconnectedness and to our humanity that we claim. Look, the issue of the one state, two states, the issue of the bid, that's really the political leadership of the Palestinians, and that's the discussion that you guys need to have. Unfortunately, all we can do is discuss on the sidelines, but it's really up to the Palestinians. And I think that for us, that the UN bid or no UN bid, we need to place, as part of our pro-justice agenda, we need to place Israeli racism, Israeli settler colonialism, and Israeli occupation apartheid at the center of our campaigning. And I do feel that no matter what comes, I mean, the end of all of our discussions at the World Social Forum, in order for it not to be part of the solidarity industry, we do need to speak about concrete campaigns. And as activists who are involved in this, I think that boycott, divestment, and sanctions needs to be, I do feel, and I think that this is missing in some of our discussions, we do need to refine it. We do need to talk about what is working, what is not working, and how we can take those campaigns to a much larger level. They deserve to be at a larger level, not just at a leaflet level, which I think is still necessary, but we need to also take it onto a larger level. How do we get our governments to be accountable for their complicity? So I do think that we need to sharpen these campaigns, and we do need to speak about concrete campaigns coming out of the World Social Forum, concrete campaigns that we can take forward to our respective countries. And I do still appreciate, again, even though the World Social Forum has its difficulties, I do still appreciate that these sort of discussions, that the discussions that we had yesterday and the day before are taking place, and I do think that there is something about meeting face to face. Yeah, that's it.
It's full. We have half an hour.
No, I think the next section starts at
4:30. Okay, we have 25 minutes.
So it's 3:30? Is that what you're saying?
The next session starts at 4:30. On the schedule, the next one starts at 4:30.
Okay, so we got 20 minutes. I think some of them are in this building. So let's be short, concrete, proposals as possible. Folks are fine with that.
So we're gonna have to leave because we have another session. But if you'd like to come, it's on Transnational Youth Movement. That's what it's called. It's by the Palestinian Youth Movement.
It's not in this building, so
You
that's
have to-
I think what
you
the
have to go
session
to-
That's why you
have
So how do you want to go here?
So, first of all, I just want to say thank you for having us in this space. And honestly, I've learned so much from this experience. And going into many different panels and into many different workshops throughout the past couple days, and also having endless meetings before hours, after hours, just constantly in conversation about a broad spectrum of just everything when it comes down to Palestine. I think one of the main issues that I face living in the States, but also living in the Bay Area, in the Greater Bay Area. I live in Oakland, but I work in San Francisco. And I think one thing that I'm constantly facing as a Palestinian youth to other Palestinian youth is the lack of communication between them and their parents. and the lack of education between their parents and them. And then also them, you know, posting constant shit on like Instagram and Facebook, you know, wearing haftas around their faces and, you know, doing all these like really kind of like odd things that they don't understand the actual like value of it, right? And constantly, and us also have to constantly, you know, educate, you know, our youth all the time, but then also trying to have also forcing them in a way to have a connection between themselves and other communities of color that they're just not grasping onto, which has also been a difficulty because, you know, yeah, they go to school with like, you know, Black and Latino youth, but they're not making the similarities that they should be making all the time, you know, regardless of if it is political, you know, or even if it's not, because a lot of them don't really understand, you know, the rhetoric behind it, but they should, you know, they should be. This is the time where they should be developing these things and these issues that they're all encountering on a daily basis. You know, they live in the same neighborhoods, they go to the same schools, they go to the same hangout areas, you know. So that's just one of, I think, my issues that I'm facing with Palestinian youth living inside of America, and also coming from San Francisco. Like, San Francisco is considered one of the most liberal cities in all of the United States, right? So like people, like, and I wondered to myself, like, why are people saying that San Francisco is super liberal and everybody is educated and everybody is this, when in actuality, when you talk to people and when you're listening to your students, they're not. Right? Like they're not receiving the basic education in which the people that are organizers, that are activists, are trying to do on the ground, but are not able to, and they're not able to reach that milestone that they're trying to set in front of them. And I also think that also has to go with going back to our elders. Our elders haven't told the youth the stories that they went through during their trials and their tribulations, you know, pre-Oslo, right? A lot of the things that many of the youth are just hearing is like Oslo, 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 and then everything was just gone afterwards. And nothing beforehand, nothing tangible that we would be able to learn from. So that's just, those are just some of the things that I wanted to talk about. And also something else that I feel like that we do within our circles, right, is holding ourselves accountable to each other. But what we don't do not enough and not often is hold our community accountable, right? And tell our community, you can't be doing this, you know, physically going into liquor stores. Why are you selling liquor to this kid? Why are you selling cigarettes to so-and-so, you know? And the thing is like, we all know each other in the community, so we this is something that we should be doing, like, across the generations and across each other, you know? Which is something that I'm finding that there's more of a lack of every single day, you know? And people are just caring more about the capital, and even like the so-called like Black and brown people that are working class are caring more and more every day about the capital rather than the community in which that they come from, the community in which that they live in. So yeah, that's just something that I just wanted to say, and I really appreciate the conversations. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's an important element to even be able to have this kind of discussion, and that is that it forces us to rethink how we frame political questions. How, over a period of time, depending on how a struggle unfolds, we are forced and have been forced to retreat even in our terminology. And in this specific discussion, the bottom line is that the settler colonial question has to be brought back to center. Because it is really the dynamic that really links the issues and struggles across the continents: racism, discrimination, forced removal, enslavement, incarceration, economic displacement. We can make the connections. And when you look at the colonial era of the early 20th century, and you look at the writings of the Zionist movement, Herzl specifically, the Rhodes, all the settler colonial projects, you look at their, and you study the language and the terminology and the framework and the connection to the imperialist colonial development. You can see the links, and it really forces us. And this language was a commonly understood language in the 60s, both within the struggles within the U.S., internationally, and the Arab and Palestinian struggle. And then when the struggle started to become codified into a state national framework, that was removed. And we need to bring it back. And the reason I bring this up is because within the U.S., this was a dynamic, and I know Kali and my African American brothers are going to agree. When you read the contrast between the way Malcolm X articulated the question of the struggle of Black America versus the civil rights movement, there was a distinct difference. And the reason why is because how you frame the struggle defined as to how you would conduct it and who you would link up with. If you define the struggle as civil rights, you codify it within the narrow framework of the system. Malcolm X said, no, it's a human right and we are international. So he linked it. And this was a considerable debate that, of course, continued today, and it was also reflected in the struggles in other liberation. In Puerto Rico, we also had the phenomena of elements within the Puerto Rican independence movement thinking that we could utilize the mechanism of the UN as a vehicle to achieve nominal independence, and part of the process was subordinating the other elements that were important to the struggle of Puerto Rico. And I think this is the question that is confronting specifically within the framework of the discussion we've been having of the Palestinian struggle, the question of the mechanisms that they are being geared towards as opposed to the real issue fundamentally, colonialism, anti-imperialism, and the mass movement of the struggle. It's very similar to what, and that's all I wanted to just say. I think I wanted to end with, what's the famous quote by Audre Lorde? You cannot use the master's tools.
Yeah, you can't use the Lord's tools to destroy the master's
There you go. I always think about that.
Any last minute comments before we break? The next session, I think, is going to be taking place focusing
in fact, my question or my comment that if we agree that our struggle is one struggle, that the Palestinian struggle against colonialism is very connected to the African people against racism, to the African Americans. I mean, is it right that if somebody or part of the leadership say that we accept that we have, as our friend here say, that it's up to the people or up to the Palestinians to decide what they want. They want one state or two states, or we have to judge it from, is this really a struggle towards ending colonialism or not? Regardless, because like what happened with the ANC, what happened with there are other liberation movement that sometimes there are some deals here and there where some part of the leadership would accept some kind of deal or some kind of thing. That do we have to support it regardless if it is really a step towards the struggle against colonialism or not?
Another question? The struggle continues, I think, is what the brother basically says, regardless of, what form it just took place. We're going to have to, if I understood you right, regardless of what it's called, we're going to have to keep struggling, because of what took place yesterday is what it is at this point, but the facts on the ground and how the people are going to live and what they're going to go through, that's an ongoing process, as everybody here, I think, can attest to from our own experiences. All right, thank everybody.
Thank you.
Great session.